Who doesn't like speed? Some people have a need for it. Some have a real need for it. Everyone agrees that something done faster, all other things being equal, is better. That's why we make these pieces of media, but also why we focus on metrics like time to market and why CEO performance is measured in quarters, though that last one might be worth rethinking. So how should you think about IT process improvement? I like to use a metaphor. When you think of the military, what comes to mind? Probably soldiers with guns fighting battles, storming the beaches, taking cover, war stuff. But what if I told you that at least as of 2020, only about 16% of US military personnel were actually in combat roles? Pretty wild, right? It's called the tooth-to-tail ratio, and it's pretty controversial. Politicians don't like spending defense money on things that don't relate directly to fighting capabilities. But I think it speaks to a key point, which is that the processes supporting our key mission can be critically important to the success of our overall mission. What soldier can fight without ammunition or food or winter clothing, assuming it's winter? That brings us to the blueprint, which is really about improving IT processes. Not for their own sake, but because a good, solid foundation in information technology is increasingly necessary to get anything done. You'll come out of your improvement exercise more innovative, more customer-focused, and more resilient. Basically, you'll be better at all the things your stakeholders expect of you. But it's not easy. It's hard. Extra hard if you want to do it quickly. You'll have to overcome some common challenges. For one, people don't like change. Most people impacted by process changes don't have a good bird's eye view of the nature and impact of those changes, and might be resistant because they perceive your change as unnecessary. They might also just be averse to change in general. To encounter these holdouts is to work in IT. Some of them are still fighting yesterday's war. Another challenge is that alignment has to be intentional. Look, nobody ever says they like silos, but they crop up literally everywhere, so obviously they're working for someone. It's easy to fall into the trap of staying in your lane, as it were, but this can be detrimental, as alignment doesn't happen naturally. You've got to work at it. Really embrace the need to work together, or else you'll fall into old habits. That's no good. Of course, this won't work unless you have support from your leadership, which isn't a guarantee. At this point, it behooves me to say that you will get verbal support for this, but much like silos, it doesn't matter until work actually gets done. So, taking that verbal yes and turning it into action is hard, and even if you do get the approval to go ahead, you'll still have to deal with limited resources. Metrics that are pretty hand-weighty, just make it better. And short-term focus. What can you do for me today? How can you get this over the line? So you'll have to deal with all of this, but you can do it, and it doesn't even have to take that long. We're not talking months here. If you have a plan, anything is possible. You'll pick the right processes, optimize them, and implement, monitor, and sustain your improvements. Those are the 3 key steps you'll need to take. Now, there are a few things you'll need to know as we go on this journey. To start, you'll want to incorporate the human element. Process improvement is as much about cultural transformation as it is about operational efficiency. It's easy enough to focus on the technical aspects of a transformation, but many of the things you'll need to overcome are a little more subjective than that. Think cultural resistance, subjective definitions of value, and of course, the necessarily iterative nature of a successful program. You're going to need to balance the tangible with the intangible. Quants hate this. Next, you'll want to challenge the conventional wisdom on prioritization. Most folks default to ROI. Let's do the stuff that's going to have the most value first, and there's definitely a benefit there. But priorities are often driven by subjective and non-financial factors. You ignore emotional arguments and cultural alignment at your peril. And I do mean peril. You'll also want to think about constraints as signals as much as barriers. While it's true that, that's how we've always done it, is not a great argument for avoiding a process change, it does tell you something about how your organization operates, and you should heed it. All feedback is good feedback. If you're encountering this type of resistance, you should learn from it. Another key point is that there's always room for improvement. Always. The goal shouldn't be to eliminate all waste because that's not possible. Rather, you should work to minimize it where possible and rethink processes that have been traditionally considered good enough. You might be surprised by what you find. Finally, sustaining change requires building capacity. You'll need to include continuous improvement in your planning. It isn't something that just happens. Improvements are neither permanent nor self-sustaining. You'll need to build and maintain the superstructure. Let's get down to brass tacks and talk about how to actually do this, like for real. I know an expert who can help. I'm joined today by Vince Mirabelli, a principal research director at Infotech. Welcome, Vince.
Thanks, Jeremy. Great to be here.
So everybody wants to fix their IT processes. People come up to me and ask how to do it all the time. CIOs, applications directors, infrastructure directors, people on the bus. Everyone wants to do this. We've had IT forever. Why is it so hard?
So a couple of things. One, it's kind of like the thing that we avoid doing, even though we know we need to do it, like eating broccoli. We know that we have to eat vegetables. We just don't want to, and so we put it off. The other thing that I have found historically is within IT, we don't recognize our own processes. We think of process as a business thing. And so we leverage technology to support our business partners in their process improvement efforts. But we never look at our own processes to say, can we be better? It's kind of like that analogy of the mask dropping from the plane when there's low oxygen, right? You are instructed to put on your mask first. And that's kind of what we're asking IT departments to do now, is recognize you got to put your mask on so that you can support the people that you work with, your partners in the business, in putting their masks on and making them more efficient, more effective.
So that's a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up. So one of the things that I was thinking about as I was preparing the intro for this video is sort of the nature of, call it frontline versus support type of work, right? So let's say I work for a manufacturer. I would consider your operational employees to be the people who are strategizing and building the products that you sell. And then IT folks and HR folks and finance folks are sort of back office and sort of facilitate that. Am I thinking about this in the right way? Is that how, when you think about IT process improvement, you should conceive of your organization?
So I think there's benefits in looking at it both ways. And looking at process for IT is the same as looking at process for business, right? Now, the challenge that we have is a lot of the work that we do in IT is not visible. It is, a ticket comes in and it just magically arrives in our triage space and we triage it. And then we do something and something happens. We don't actually watch a part move along an assembly line. And so it's a lot less visible. That doesn't mean that it's less real. So if we think about that ticket coming in, that is some requests from one of your partners in the business or some area of the business that is asking for help, a change, an enhancement, something. The longer we let that sit and wait, the clock is ticking and they are waiting, dealing with that pain. And so if our processes don't support the engagement of that ticket, acknowledgement, and then ultimately correction of action, then we are allowing waste to be introduced into our process for the entire organization.
So a question I want to ask you is about sort of the role of an IT person and how they conceive of themselves. If I just serve as an order taker, a really efficient one, you tell me what you want on the sandwich and I'll make the sandwich exactly right. Am I missing some of the value that I could provide to my business?
You are, and it also depends on the level that you're at and what you ultimately care about. If I am that intake, I hate the word, but order taker, then I want to be efficient and effective in what I do. Now, if my processes enable that and I'm able to, get through as many tickets as I can, great. What I need to think about and what we need to think about within IT might not reside at that level. There are levels to what I care about. And so it might be that person's superior or even beyond who actually cares about that strategic value and is that even the right way for us to do the work that we're doing, right? So if I'm good at taking tickets, but there's a better way, we've figured out a better mousetrap, or we figured out some better, maybe we don't even need tickets. There's always more than one way to peel a potato. And so let's understand, what am I doing, but also why am I doing it? Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And I think a lot of times, and this is true in IT, it's true in business, it's true everywhere. We never really think about why we do things. We just follow the process and we get into this rote of that's the way we've always done it, which is a terrible approach to fixing things.
So the purpose is to provide some critical feedback to processes to identify areas for potential improvement.
Absolutely. I would say I have a really lame joke if I can tell it. What's the biggest room in the world?
Oh, that's a great question. The room where the stuff that we're gonna do at some point lives?
That's actually a pretty good answer. It's the room for improvement. Okay.
Leave
So
that in.
so it's the room for improvement. Like there's always something that you can improve. Just because you've got a process that you might think is good enough doesn't mean that there's not something that you could do better, faster, cheaper, smarter. And so that room for improvement exists no matter where you are in the organization, including in IT. But again, we typically see things as process is a business focus and it's not for us.
So we agree that this is sort of a simple but not easy proposition, I think, right? This idea that, yeah, everyone says processes should be improved. I've yet to meet a leader who's come to me and said, you know what, I think we should make our processes just a little worse. Actually, there are some tech support vendors maybe, but we'll come back to them. So when I think about this then, what are sort of the common roadblocks that make this so hard, right? It's a simple concept. Why can't people do it?
So there's a couple things. There's one is knowledge. I'm not able to articulate how to take action. I know that there's something wrong. My spidey sense tells me this can be better, but I might not know what to do. The second thing I'll talk about is actually very foundational and cultural and organizational. We sometimes feel very criticized or critical when we think about process. And so I know in my past, I've dealt with leaders where you go in and make a suggestion for a process improvement. And we know that there's always room for improvement. But you make a suggestion and they take it very almost personally as a criticism that they aren't doing a good job. And it's absolutely not the case. It's just, look, there's an opportunity to be better. It's not that you aren't doing what you need to. It's not a criticism of you as a leader, but it's recognizing that there's something that could be done, because we end up with these legacy processes, or worse, we end up with the dreaded workaround in our processes. And what we end up with is accumulated process debt over time. And so something happens, we say, you know what, let's add a step to our process. And now that becomes just extra bloat and it just persists. So let's look at it critically. Let's look at it objectively and say, what in this process actually adds value? And identify that. Everything else we can then identify as wasteful activity. Now, waste doesn't mean throw it away, but it means it's an invitation to a conversation to say, is this something that we absolutely have to do? And what is the value that we get from this step? If the answer is no and nothing, then it's an invitation to a conversation to say, how can we modify our process to eliminate some of this waste? Because that means faster time to resolution, faster time to delivery, faster time to value for our stakeholders, for our customers, for the people that consume what we're doing.
So I think this really comes back to that conversation of the why,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I can look at a process and understand what people are doing. But in order for me to improve it, at least with any competence, I have to understand what they're trying to accomplish with it. And then I can offer some suggestions.
What's interesting though with that, Jeremy, is sometimes there's the process as it's documented, and then there's the process as it exists.
Yeah.
And those are two different things. So I can look at a process document and say, this is what should be happening. This is the workflow. This is how information moves, how data moves. When I can go and actually observe it and see what is happening, I may see deviations. And so what that process document effectively amounts to is a piece of paper. It's not worth a lot, because what's actually happening on the floor, at desks, over the internet, is something very, very different. Now, what that could be is that one of your very smart employees has figured out a better way, right? Instead of doing A, B, C, D, Janet does A, B, then jumps to D, and maybe does C in certain situations. Well, I want to capture that knowledge and I want to leverage that information, because that's not something that is captured in my process documentation. But I want to understand, to your point, why Janet does that. Because if Janet has figured out a better way, I don't want that to be just with Janet. and now I'm picking on Janet. I want the whole team to engage in that better way, right? But it starts with, we have to start with the starting point of our documentation, but then let's go and observe and see what's actually happening. Because those workarounds, those things that sometimes change the process shouldn't be cause for punishment. We should actually exploit that and make that the new standard. Change our documentation, change our process.
So a question that I have then, because you're a practical guy, right? Infotech's a practical company.
Mm-hmm.
How do you actually do this? So if I'm a CIO, I get hired on, there have been some rumblings about potential process improvements. And as you said, there's always room for improvement. How do I do that? Do I just follow Janet around in your example? Do I get someone to do that, report back to me? Who does it? Is it a business analyst? Is it me? Is it somebody else? Is it a third party? How do you handle this typically?
So it can be any of those, right? Now, following Janet might be a little bit creepy. We don't want to necessarily do that. It could be a business analyst. I introduced my own bias here, but BAs are pretty good at doing a lot of that process modeling, process improvement. But it really does depend on the organization. Here's what does matter. It's bringing people together and aligning them on the objectives and what you're trying to achieve. I need to ensure that I've engaged the right stakeholders. So if I'm improving a process in my service desk, right, excluding the service desk team doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I need to ensure that I've got the right people having the right conversations. I also need to ensure that as I'm bringing people together, there is a decision maker, that there is someone that has that authority to say, yes, we're going to stop doing that, or yes, we're going to make that change, or no, we're not going to do that. And that's important because otherwise you get a bunch of people that are really smart, really great ideas, but no action, no follow-up, because they're not authorized to make those types of decisions. So we want to have a decision maker in the room. But I would say, what matters more is not the title, it's the mindset of continuous improvement and understanding and recognizing that there often is a better way. So let's explore what those better ways might be and then make a decision on what it should be.
So our management and governance framework details dozens of IT processes, ranging from things like the service desk to digital strategy and anything in between, enterprise architecture, you name it. That's a lot of different things. How do I pick which things to focus on? And are there maybe any non-traditional ways you might consider doing that prioritization?
So it's interesting. In this blueprint, we took what I'll call the Led Zeppelin approach. There are two paths we can go by. And the management and governance framework is absolutely path one. Going through that route, you have an identified priority to your maturity in all of the different processes. And so now I'm able to say, okay, well, where are my opportunities for improvement? And I can go through a prioritization exercise to make those determinations. You're right, we can't fix everything, right? It would be great if I could wave a magic wand and just fix everything. That's not realistic, it's not reasonable, and I don't have time for that. So how do I pick the 1, 2, 3 things that I'm going to get the biggest value from as part of going through this blueprint, right? So management and governance framework is the suggested path 1. Path 2, if I haven't completed that, it's a little bit more work, but it is still a prioritization exercise. It's brainstorming, listing out all of your processes. Hopefully you're not brainstorming too much, because I would hope most organizations would have knowledge of their processes, maybe wishful thinking in some of the ones I've worked in, but that's a different story. And so, it's a matter of collecting those together and recognizing the impact that you're going to get through improvement of each of those processes, ranking them, and then picking the top 2, 3, or whatever that number is. Where things get a little bit not messy, but less linear is understanding that cultural and political aspect. So if I look at my top list and I see number 1 belongs to an area where I have a leader who is not a supporter of process improvement, that is probably not a place where I want to start, because I'm just setting myself up for failure. Or I'm setting myself up for greater challenges, because not only do I have to improve the processes, I have to convince them that those processes are worth fixing. And so I might be more successful in my approach going down and saying, well, this person is a supporter, or this person is on board with what we're trying to achieve. So let's leverage that as a bit of a case study and a demonstration, a proof of concept, to say, look at what we've been able to do. And it becomes a lot harder for process one, that resistor, to refuse in the future, because we've now demonstrated the value of this approach. So there's a prioritization, but then we need to introduce just some common sense and say, well, what makes sense for us to do? And it might not be 1, 2, 3. It might be 2, 5, and 8 that are the ones that we want to focus. What matters is that it matters to us, and it's going to make an impact to our organization.
So it's not strictly quantitative in every context.
It starts quantitative, but then you introduce that human element of, logic.
So I understand that you've developed a process to help folks do this, a methodology. So could you take me through that a little bit? What does that look like, and what do you get at the end of it?
Yeah, so I'll start at the end. What you get out of it is improved processes. Like, that is an measurable impact to those processes. So we're not just making change and going, well, hope it worked. We're actually able to quantify and measure the impact of those improvements. We've talked about that first step, right? The 2 paths. We can go through the management governance framework or diagnostic. We can go through our own prioritization exercise. And what that really helps us do is, one, identify the processes that we want to target. And the second step in that, what I'll call phase 1, is, now that we know the processes, who are the people that need to be involved in those discussions? Because the intent here is not to have this drag on. It's to have a very focused, condensed 1-week period where we fix those 3 processes or 2 processes, whatever you're capable of doing or want to take on. But we want to ensure that the right people are in the room so that we can make those decisions. And that becomes really important. So freeing up leader time, identifying your process, like, who is the owner of the process? Because a lot of times we'll default to, a manager in a frontline area, but when they actually need to make a decision on, can we change this process? I need to go ask. Well, then you're not the process owner. You're the process enabler, but you're not the owner. And we need to find that process owner. Similar to like a product owner who makes those determinations on their product. So out of that first phase, we've identified what we're going to work on. We identified who needs to be there so that we can make the most use of our time. Then we get into the fun stuff. We've identified our stuff. We've identified our processes. Now it's time to fix them. A lot of times it starts with, what's happening today, and not just what's happening on paper, but what is actually happening in the process. A lot of challenges I've seen with process improvement in a lot of organizations is that they go to the manager or the director or the VP and ask about process. They're so far removed that they understand what's on paper, but they may not understand what's happening for real. And so as part of this exercise in that transition from phase 1 to phase 2 is, let's get the people that are actually experiencing the pain. Let's bring representation from that front line, the doers, and ensure that their voice is heard in this room, because they're going to bring a perspective that leadership may not, or might likely does not have. So having them in the room is important as well. In that week, we've got all those perspectives. We've understood all of our dependencies, and we make decisions on, what are we changing? We design our future state or our target state. And if we are able to, we bring it to reality. We actually test it out. We run through simulation, through live environment. If you recognize that there are challenges that you need to overcome, this is where we start to build out a backlog of, okay, you need to make this purchase, you need to hire this resource, you need to do X, Y, Z. That's phase 2. Now, typically, this is where traditional consultants in the process improvement space, that's where they end. I've told you what to do. I've supported you through this. See ya. We didn't want to do that. with this blueprint. And that's what brings us to phase 3, which to me is a very unique offering in the marketplace. This is where we build in a support model for you, for your organization. So immediately post-workshop, if we've got a list of things, we're going to check in with you once a week. How's it going? What have you done what you said you were going to do? What other challenges are you facing? What are some of the things that you're hearing in your organization? How else can we support you? Process improvement is an event. Continuous improvement starts that flywheel of making us more and more efficient and effective. So we want to get them in that shift to continuous improvement and recognizing that there's always room for improvement. We'll then revisit at 3 months, at 6 months. One, for a check-in. Again, how are you doing? What are some of the challenges that you're facing? But also, what's next? So we fixed these 3 processes. What should we do next? And so it does start that mindset of continuous improvement that we're just going to always have something that we can fix and that we can improve.
So treating it as a one and done is probably not the move.
So you can treat it as a one and done. You're going to get some benefit, but the true power of this is building it into your DNA, making it part of your operating system so that it just becomes the default, so that you don't actually need continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is part of what you do.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you.
For more on this, check us out at infotech.com.